Chapter 146. I remember. Mo Xiaoyao, of course, remembered. That year, Guanpu led troops to attack Pan Long Mountain. He was obstinate and didn't listen to his subordinates' advice. In just 3 days, he lost over 1,000 soldiers, but they didn't even touch the outskirts of Pan Long Mountain. Coincidentally, Mo Xiaoyao was out on an errand and passed by the area, so he went to take a look. He happened to hear Guanpu confidently ask soldiers to be meat shields to attack the mountain. Mo Xiaoyao's temper back then was much worse than it was now. He immediately whipped Guanpu. Of course, Mo Xiaoyao was also severely punished by his elder brother after the incident. Find a way to change him. I don't want to see that idiot stay in Shattering Snow Pass, Mo Xiaoyao said. I'm afraid not. He's one of Mo Jingqi's study companions, as well as his confidant. I'm sure Mo Jingli left him in Shattering Snow Pass to guard against Mo Jingli. Feng Zhiyao shrugged. Mo Xiaoyao calmly glanced at him. Feng San, make that idiot leave Shattering Snow Pass in a month. I don't care what method you use. Receiving Mo Xiaoyao's threatening gaze, Feng Zhiyao immediately put away his frivolous expression. With a serious expression, he almost swore to the heavens, "Yes, Your Highness. I think Mo Jingli should be very interested in Guanpu. But, who will guard Shattering Snow Pass if we change the pass? Our men definitely can't. Mo Jingqi won't be reassured." General Murong, Mo Xiaoyao pondered for a moment before speaking. General Murong has already stayed in the capital for 2 years. Although Mo Jingqi says he sympathizes with General Murong's hard work guarding the border, you and I both know that it's not a good thing for a general to stay in the capital for a long time. It'll only weaken his spirit. Mo Jingqi wouldn't suspect General Murong as well, right? Feng Zhiyao asked. Otherwise, General Murong was much stronger than that trash Guanpu. Why would he leave a general who could win battles idle and use an idiot? No. He's just more trustworthy than General Murong. You go and think of a way to get Guanzhe back. I will deal with General Murong's matter. No problem. Prince. After sending off Feng Zhiyao, the small study returned to its original tranquility. Yili lazily leaned back in her chair as she watched Mo Xiaoyao continue to study the map on the table. After being together for so long, Yili understood this man. This man seemed to be very used to preparing for a rainy day, and he thought much more than ordinary people. Aren't you tired? What if what you're thinking doesn't happen? Mo Xiaoyao raised his head to look at her and smiled faintly. It would be best if nothing happened. If you tire yourself to death, what about the rest? Mo Xiaoyao smiled as he put away the map on the table. I never planned to tire myself to death. Besides, don't I have Li to help me now? Also, I only do what I need to do while I'm still alive. If I really die, what does this world or Dechu state become have to do with me? Yili was speechless. Ever since Mo Xiaoyao discovered that she was faster and more effective at handling the accounts than him, he used the excuse of not feeling well and refused to accept the accounts. No matter if it was the inner palace or the outer court, he even threw the accounts of the Mahist army to her to handle. This further made Yili understand why the imperial family was so wary of the Ding King's residence. After more than a month, Yili was certain that the Ding King's residence was not necessarily richer than the national treasury, but Mo Xiaoyao was definitely richer than Mo Jingqi. Although the Mahist army was still supported by the imperial court, Yili believed that even if the imperial court did not provide the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry with rations, the Ding King's residence would still be able to support these two armies. Just by looking at the accounts that Mo Xiaoyao threw to her, it was clear that there were gold, silver, copper mines, and large amounts of land and industries all over the Dechu state. When an emperor knew that he was poorer than his officials, how could he not be envious and jealous? The Ming dynasty Shen Wansan had set a very good example for the future generations. Just as the emperor and the empress dowager were fighting both openly and covertly in the court, the Yunhui general Guan Rong, who was guarding Shattered Snow Pass, accidentally fell off the back of his horse when he was hunting. Furthermore, his beloved horse broke one of his legs. This matter seemed insignificant, but it faintly made the situation between the emperor and Li Wang even more tense. As for who would be the new general of Shattered Snow Pass, it set off another wave in the imperial court. However, the Ding King's residence that stirred up these undercurrents was still independent of the people's sight, appearing quiet and comfortable. In the elegantly decorated and comfortable bedroom, a middle-aged man in his 50s sat by the bed, holding Mo Xiuyao's hand and carefully taking his pulse. The middle-aged man had a scholarly appearance, but his eyes faintly revealed a sharp light. Between his brows, there was a trace of carefree pride. Although he was a doctor, he looked more like a wanderer wandering the world. Prince said that the prescription he wrote last year is no longer effective. The middle-aged man frowned. Dr. He, who usually treated Mo Xiuyao, also stood to the side and said, "That's right. Last year's prescription completely lost its effectiveness when winter came this year." Mr. Shen, Prince's illness. The middle-aged man, who was Shen Yang, the imperial doctor of Dechu State, frowned and said, "Let me see the current prescription." Dr. He quickly handed over the prescription that Mo Xiuyao had recently taken. Shen Yang looked carefully and raised his eyebrows. "This prescription is good." Chapter 147. Dr. He asked doubtfully, "Isn't the fire poison and the cold poison just the opposite of each other?" Shen Yang said unhappily, "It's true that the cold and fire poison are opposite of each other, but not all of them can cancel each other out. In reality, most of the poisons will coexist with each other and they can form a more unpredictable poison." Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, "Then it's been hard on Mr. Shen this time. Since so many years have passed, there's no harm in waiting for another 2 years. Mr. Shen has just come back and you've already worked so hard. You should go rest first." Shen Yang looked with praise at the calm Mo Xiuyao. He nodded and said, "This is the first time this one has seen Prince's mental strength." "Prince, Wang Fei, don't worry. Even though Shen Yang's skills are not good enough to cure the prince's poison, before the raging fire lotus matures, Shen Yang can guarantee the prince's safety. Tomorrow, this one will adjust the prescription for the prince. This year, the prince's body has not deteriorated too much. When the weather warms up, there shouldn't be any problems." Yili nodded and said, "Thank you for your trouble, Mr. Shen. Chief Steward Mo, take Mr. Shen to the guest room to rest." Chief Steward Mo acknowledged and went forward to invite Shen Yang and Dr. He out. The room was silent. Mo Xiuyao raised his head and saw Yili staring at him in a daze. He smiled faintly and said, "Yili, don't worry. If the cold poison was so easy to cure, we wouldn't have waited so many years. I originally didn't have much hope." Yili sat down by the bed and looked at him. She sighed softly and said, "There's always some disappointment, isn't there?" Mo Xiuyao was slightly startled. He looked at Yili for a while before saying with a bitter smile, "Is it that obvious?" Yili did not speak. Mo Xiuyao reached out and pulled Yili into his embrace. Yili was not used to it and wanted to reject it, but she gave up on the idea in an instant. She quietly leaned against Mo Xiuyao and allowed him to imprison her in his embrace. Mo Xiuyao hugged her tightly, burying his face in her fragrant hair. "Li, I can't accept this." Mo Xiuyao's voice was filled with emptiness and despair. Yili frowned slightly and raised her hand to support Mo Xiuyao's shoulder. She knew that Mo Xiuyao was never as calm as he appeared to be. If he could really remain calm, then he would not be the Prince Ding who was still devising strategies even though he was bedridden. He would not be far from becoming a saint. If only father and big brother were still around. "Give me 5 years and I'll be able to wipe out the entire Xiling. 10 years at most, I'll be able to drive the entire northern tribes to the barren lands in the north. At that time, no one will be able to threaten the peace of the Dechu state." The Dechu state can also truly become a more glorious dynasty than the previous one. This has always been the long-cherished wish of the Ding royal family, and also the wish of Emperor Taizu. Why? Why did they do this? Ah Li. Do you know, when I first woke up 7 years ago, I couldn't wait to kill every single one of them. How dare they? How dare they treat Big Brother like that? Mo Xiaoyao hugged Yili tightly, his voice low and tired. Father said that he wanted to protect the people of the Dechu state. Big Brother also said that the peace of the Dechu state was more important than anything else. But how did they treat us? At that time, I told myself, even if I could never stand up again, I would still kill them. But you didn't kill them, right? Yili leaned against him and said softly. With the strength of the Ding royal family, it might not be possible to resist the entire military strength of the Dechu state, but if it was a life and death struggle, killing a few people was definitely not a problem. But even when Mo Xiaoyao was at the peak of his anger, he didn't do this. Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a while, then said softly, I can't. The soldiers of the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry have been in the army for generations, guarding the borders of the Dechu state. I can't let them bear the charge of treason. If that's the case, what about the sacrifice and perseverance of the Ding royal family and the Mahist army for over 100 years? Yili was silent. Perhaps this was the source of Mo Xiaoyao's pain. His intelligence and the strength of the Ding royal family made him skip the process of thinking about who his enemy was. He hated the ruler of this country, and even more, he hated this country. However, he couldn't simply destroy them. In fact, he had to protect them. Protecting the people he hated the most. No matter who it was, this was definitely torture. Li, there will be a day. I will kill them. You. Are you scared of me? Leaning against Yili's shoulder, Mo Xiaoyao asked in a low voice. Yili lowered her eyes and looked at the bed behind Mo Xiaoyao, softly saying, didn't you already know that I'm not a cowardly person? But I know that Li is a soft-hearted person. Mo Xiaoyao laughed in a low voice, if there is a day that Li finds out that I'm not a good person, then I might as well tell you first. Yili was a little surprised and moved back a little. She saw Mo Xiaoyao looking at her attentively and gently. Does it matter whether I think you're a good person or not? Mo Xiaoyao raised his head and softly brushed the hair by her ear. Of course, Li is my princess. Even if one day Li finds out that I'm not a good person, I won't let you go. Mo Xiaoyao smiled. That smile seemed to be bright and warm like never before. Yili couldn't help but feel a little dazed. She only felt a faint, slightly warm lips gently landing on her own lips. It was just a very light touch, and it seemed to linger for a moment. Then she heard Mo Xiaoyao's laughter in her ear, Li, I will never let you go. There seemed to be a slight numbness on her lips. Yili felt that her ability to respond, which she had always been proud of, seemed to have completely stagnated. Ah, hey, did I agree? Princess, Miss Mu Rong requests an audience. Qing Wan at the door reported in a clear voice. Yili suddenly stood up. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao's smiling face and glared at him. She said to the outside, invite Mu Rong to the flower pavilion, I'll go immediately. Qing Wan acknowledged and left. Yili snorted and turned to leave. Mo Xiaoyao reached out to grab her. Meeting Yili's angry eyes, Mo Xiaoyao smiled helplessly, Li, change your clothes before you go out. Yili looked in confusion at the clothes she was wearing. Even though it was slightly casual, it wasn't too rude to go see Mu Rong. Mo Xiaoyao said, Leng Er definitely came with Miss Mu Rong. I'm a bit tired. Go see him for me. Yili saw that Mo Xiaoyao's brows were slightly tired. She then remembered that after Shenyang arrived, Mo Xiaoyao had been tormented for so long. Even though he didn't show it on the surface, but his mood was definitely not small. Her heart softened and she said in a low voice, I'll go see him. You sleep for a while. Helping Mo Xiaoyao lie down and tucking him in, Yili turned to go into the inner room to change her clothes. Mo Xiaoyao laid on the bed and watched Yili's departing figure, a faint smile on his lips. Li, you're so soft-hearted that I don't want to let go. So, even if you don't like me, I won't give you a chance to regret it. In the parlor, Mu Rongting looked at the elegant furnishings in the hall with great interest. When she saw Leng Haoyu leisurely sitting on the side drinking tea, she didn't forget to glare at him with dissatisfaction. I came to say goodbye to Li Li. Why do you have to be so thick-skinned and follow me? Leng Haoyu smiled with good temper. Ting, Princess Consort Ding and I have met once. You came to say goodbye, can't I come to say goodbye? Mu Rongting said with some irritation. Leng Haoyu, I'm going because my father is going to Yongzhou. Why are you, a young master, running around? Be careful that you don't die of exhaustion on the way. Leng Haoyu blinked and looked at her with a touched face. Ting, are you worried about me? Don't worry, for Ting, no matter how difficult the journey is, I will definitely persevere. Chapter 148. Leng Haoyu. Go to hell. Mu Rongting had been pestered by Leng Haoyu for so many years, but she found that she had always underestimated how thick-skinned this guy was. She was so angry that her pretty face turned red and she couldn't help but stomp her feet. Leng Haoyu looked at his angry fiancé in a good mood and drank tea with a smile. There was a trace of helplessness in his half-closed eyes. In Ting Er's eyes, he would always be a hedonistic son who only knew how to eat, drink, and play. He would never be as promising and capable as his elder brother. Only when he saw Ting Er angry at him did he feel that he was still different from others in her eyes. Cough cough. Murong, who made you so angry? Yi Li slowly stepped into the parlor and looked at the angry Murong Ting with a smile. Only then did Murong Ting remember that this was not her home, nor was it somewhere outside. It was the Ding King's mansion that many influential people in the capital were cautious of. She couldn't help but be shocked. She glared at Leng Haoyu and said angrily, who else could it be other than this guy? You made me so rude. Leng Haoyu stood up and bowed. Greetings, princess. Yi Li smiled and said, young Master Leng, you don't have to be so polite. Please sit down. She pulled Murong Ting to the side and sat down. She raised her hand and pinched Murong Ting's angry little face and said with a smile, Murong, did you come to the Ding King's mansion at this time to say goodbye to me? Murong Ting looked at her in surprise and said with a smile, I didn't expect you to be so well informed even though you didn't leave the house. I only got the news yesterday afternoon. But time is too tight. Father has to leave early tomorrow morning, so I can only take advantage of the time today to say goodbye to you. Murong also wants to accompany General Murong to Yongzhou. Murong Ting said proudly, of course. My father is going to the border alone. How can I not follow him to take care of him? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said, General Murong also agreed to let you go? Murong Ting wasn't young anymore. She had to get married in 2 years at the latest. General Murong might not come back for 3 to 5 years if he was stationed at the border. Murong Ting glanced at Leng Haoyu who was sitting at the side. She pulled the braid on her chest and whispered, Father has already agreed. Originally, his father did not agree, but Leng Haoyu said something to his father that made him change his mind. Murong Ting thought with some jealousy. She really didn't know if she was her father's biological daughter or if Leng Haoyu, that bastard, was his biological son. His father actually changed his mind after listening to him. She had been begging for the entire night. Sensing Murong Ting's dissatisfaction, Leng Haoyu touched his nose helplessly and said, Princess, actually, I'm also here to say goodbye. I will also be heading south soon. She is destined to like someone who is stronger than her. I wish you good luck. Thank you, Princess. Leng Haoyu smiled. Looking at the young man in front of her, Yi Li sighed softly in her heart. The world only saw how the emperor valued the eldest young master of the Leng family, Leng Qingyu, who was proficient in both civil and military matters, but no one knew that this young man, who seemed to be reluctant to leave brothels and taverns every day and fooled around with his friends, actually held nearly half of the assets of the Ding imperial estate. The money flowing through his hands every day was enough to make any noble family's heart beat faster. Yi Li slowly ground the ink, picked up the brush, and wrote a few words. After drying it, she folded it and directly handed it to Leng Haoyu without even giving him an envelope. If you meet eldest brother, you can give this to him. It doesn't matter if you don't meet him. Just deal with it casually. Leng Haoyu took a look and was sure that he didn't understand what was written on it. He didn't care and raised his eyebrows as he put the note into the secret pocket. He asked, "Does the prince and princess have any other instructions?" Yi Li smiled and said, "The prince has always been at ease with young Master Leng's work, so I have nothing else to instruct. However, I'm afraid that we have underestimated Mo Jingli before. Young Master Leng should be careful this time. Of course, there is also the safety of General Murong." Presumably, the prince agreed to let young Master Leng go because of this consideration. Leng Haoyu said apologetically, "Did the prince agree?" Yi Li looked at him and raised her eyebrows. "Otherwise, why do you think I want to talk to you alone?" Leng Haoyu's eyebrows flashed with joy. He had insisted on going to the south. Although the prince didn't fly into a rage, he still went against the prince's wishes. This made him feel guilty and uneasy. Yi Li looked at him and said, "The prince isn't feeling well and has already rested. Since he didn't stop you, he naturally agreed to your plan. It's just that the situation in the south will be tense in the future. You are different from Feng Zhiyao and the others. It's really risky to go to the south at this time." Feng Zhiyao also looked like a dissolute young master, but like Mo Xiuyao, he had fought his way out of the battlefield when he was a teenager. The situation was also carried out in secret. Leng Haoyu had a large amount of wealth in his hands. It was really easy to attract attention. Once Mo Jingli or the emperor noticed his abnormality, it would be a fatal disaster. Chapter 149. Hearing Yi Li's words, Leng Haoyu's heart calmed down. "Princess, please rest assured. Haoyu won't ruin Prince's plans. A few years ago, I had the idea of doing some small business in Nanjiang. This chaos in Nanjiang is a good opportunity. It's good that Master Leng understands. Tomorrow, General Murong will set off. Master Leng is." Leng Haoyu shook his head. "I'll set off in 5 days. I'll go south by water." Yi Li saw that Leng Haoyu was thoughtful and didn't say anything else. She only said a few words and invited Leng Haoyu to go back to the flower pavilion to see Murong Ting. Standing in front of the majestic palace, Yi Li sighed in her heart. This was her 3rd time entering the palace. Due to the unpleasant experience of the previous 2 times, being summoned by the emperor to the palace this time made her more vigilant and careful. She, as the princess consort of Ding, was a woman. Under normal circumstances, even if the emperor wanted to see her, he should summon her in the name of the empress or Yi Zhaoyi. "Princess Ding, the emperor is inside. Please go in." The eunuch leading the way said in a low and flattering voice. Yi Li glanced at him. She still had a slight impression of him. He was the eunuch who came to the Yi residence to deliver the marriage edict. Yi Li nodded. Qing Wan and Qing Yu were left outside. The shadow guard naturally couldn't move freely in the palace. Yi Li could only walk alone into the magnificent palace that symbolized power and wealth. Princess Consort Yi of Ding greets the emperor. Long live the emperor. The spacious palace seemed cold and empty because of the lack of people. Mo Jingqi sat high up in the hall, looking down at the woman who was curtsying in the hall. After a while, he said, "Princess Consort Ding, you may rise." Yi Li stood up. "Thank you, Emperor." Mo Jingqi pointed to a chair, indicating for Yi Li to sit down. He asked with a smile, since the beginning of winter, Prince Ding's health has been poor. I wonder if he's better now. Yili lowered her eyes and said softly, "Thank you for your concern, Emperor. The weather is getting warmer. Prince's health is still poor, but it's much better than during the winter." Mo Jingqi's eyes narrowed, carefully examining the woman's expression. She was calm and peaceful as an ordinary young woman. But this kind of calmness appeared in front of the emperor. It wasn't so ordinary. Moreover, according to the news that he had received, Prince Ding was rather concerned about this princess. How could a person without any instincts make Prince Ding care? It seemed, he had made a mistake back then. Even that arrogant brother of his had suffered a few losses in her hands. Every time he mentioned Yili in front of Mo Jingli, the other party's face was as black as ink. Mo Jingqi began to wonder if marrying such a woman to Mo Xiuyao was an insult or a help. But it didn't matter, he would solve these problems very soon. You have to manage the king's manor and take care of Prince Ding. Princess consort, you've worked hard. Mo Jingqi smiled. Emperor is too kind. These are all things Yili should do. Yili calmly replied. The two exchanged pleasantries for a long time. Mo Jingqi looked at the calm woman below and his heart grew increasingly irritated. It seemed that ever since Prince Ding's marriage was arranged, everything began to go wrong. Originally, Mo Jingli was only making small moves in the dark. But now, the Empress Dowager's actions were getting bigger and bigger. He was almost directly confronting Mo Jingli in the open. Because of the Empress Dowager and Prince Li, there were some people in the imperial court who were worried. Previously, his confidant Guan Zhong, who was sent to guard Shattered Snow Pass, had his leg kicked by a horse for no reason. As a result, Shattered Snow Pass had to be replaced. He sent his confidant to Shattered Snow Pass partly to guard against Mo Jingli and partly to guard against Nanzhao. Although Murong Shen was a capable fighter, he was not as trustworthy as Guan Zhe. Shattered Snow Pass was such an important place. It made Mo Jingqi very uneasy to hand it over to someone who was not his confidant. But, after thinking about it, Mo Jingqi had to admit that there were not many capable people among his confidants. At least, he really could not find a trustworthy candidate to replace Murong Shen. Thinking of the news he just received, that Mo Jingli dared to secretly collude with the saint of Nanjiang, Mo Jingqi's chest burned with anger. But he could only endure it. Mo Jingli was his brother, and he had no evidence to prove that Mo Jingli was related to the saint of Nanjiang. No matter if it was the Empress Dowager or the ministers related to Mo Jingli in the imperial court, they would not agree with him punishing Prince Li. He was the emperor, but many times, he found that he was not as arrogant as he once thought. Many times, even a simple decision would be hindered by all sides. Princess Ding, when I arranged for you to be married to Prince Ding, did you have any resentment in your heart? After a moment of silence, Mo Jingqi stared at Yili and asked abruptly. Yili was stunned. She quickly thought about what Mo Jingqi meant, but on the surface, she said calmly, Your Majesty's arrangement of marriage is a grace to Yili. How could I have any resentment? Oh. Mo Jingqi lowered his head to look at her with interest, smiling as he said, You were originally the princess consort that was personally arranged by the late emperor. My royal brother is talented in both literature and martial arts, and can be considered one of the most outstanding talents in the capital. But because of an imperial edict, you changed from Princess Consort Li to the pitiful Princess Ding. Do you really not have any resentment in your heart? Greetings to Princess Ding. Yi Zhaoyi invites you in. As soon as they came out of the hall, they ran into the eunuch in charge of Yi Yu Palace who had been waiting for them. Yi Li frowned slightly. In October, Yi Yu safely gave birth to a prince. This was the emperor's sixth prince. However, Yi Yu's position in the palace did not rise as expected. She was still Zhaoyi. At the same time, she became the only concubine who did not hold the position of concubine. This made Yi Yu's position, which had been like the sun at high noon in the first half of the year, immediately become awkward. Even though she had two younger sisters who were concubines, her lack of status in the palace made life difficult for her. Yi Li understood that this was Mo Jingqi's warning to the Yi family. After thinking for a while, Yi Li said, "I'm not feeling well and want to go back to rest. Please forgive me, Yi Jiaoyi." "Your Highness." The eunuch in charge did not expect Yi Li to refuse so bluntly. He said in a panic, "Your Highness, Yi Jiaoyi asks you to see her for the sake of your sisterhood." Yi Li frowned. Since Mo Jingqi had his eyes on her, the Empress Dowager would not be far away. Going to see Yi Yu now was not good for her or Yi Yu. Last year, she said that if Yi Yu wanted to live peacefully in the palace, it was best not to get involved in those things. Now it seemed that Yi Yu was still involved. Well, since the Yi family had gotten involved, even if Yi Yu was in the palace, she could not avoid it. "Fine, lead the way." "Thank you, Your Highness." Hearing her consent, the eunuch in charge thanked her happily and hurriedly led the way to Yi Yu's Yaohua Palace. Compared with the pregnant but radiant Yi Yu when Yi Li came to Yaohua Palace for the first time, Yi Yu was obviously much dimmer now. Holding the little prince who was still in swaddling clothes, she sat on the soft couch. Her beautiful face was full of sadness and gloominess. Seeing Yi Li come in, she hurriedly wanted to get up, but Yi Li shook her head and said, "Second sister, you don't have to be so polite." Yi Yu dismissed the people around her and looked at Yi Li. Although Yi Li was indifferent, she was obviously more elegant and graceful than a few months ago. She smiled bitterly and said, "I thought third sister wouldn't come to see me." Yi Li lowered her eyes and said softly, "Second sister, you should know that it is not good to see you and the little prince now." Yi Yu was startled. She lowered her head to look at the child in her arms who did not understand anything and said with a bitter smile, "How could I not know, but, third sister has seen my current situation." "Third sister, what do you think I can do?" Yi Li frowned and said, "Second sister, now that you have the little prince, there is no harm in taking care of the child. No matter how cruel the emperor is, he will not do anything to his own flesh and blood. Father's matters, second sister, don't get involved." Chapter 151. Yi Yu looked at her cold and calm expression and in the end, she still shook her head and said, "It was my wishful thinking. Even if I beg third sister to help us mother and son, third sister will not agree." Yi Li said, "I can't help second sister, right now. I'm afraid that no one can help each other. Since second sister knows about the matter between the emperor and Li Wang, then you should also know about the situation in the Prince Ding mansion. It's not better than second sister right now, right?" Yi Yu sighed and said, "In the past, I always boasted that I was smart, but now I know that third sister is the smart one among us sisters." Yi Li slightly frowned and said, "Since second sister is fine, I will go back first." Yi Yu quietly hugged the child and sat on the soft couch, looking at Yi Li with a faint apologetic expression. Yi Li suddenly became alert and suddenly stood up, but she only felt a wave of dizziness and her vision turned black as she fell to the ground. Yi Yu silently looked at Yi Li who had fallen to the ground and softly said, "I'm sorry third sister, I am the mother of a child. I have to make plans for my son." In the spring of the 12th year of Emperor Ping in Dechu State, Yaohua Palace caught fire. Zhao Yishir and the sixth prince died in the Sea of Fire. Ding country's princess consort, Yi Li, who was visiting Yi Jiaoyi at Yaohua Palace at that time, disappeared. Prince. Not good. In the Ding King mansion, the usually calm and steady chief steward Mo rushed to the study in the side hall of the main courtyard with messy footsteps. Feng Zhiyao sat in a chair in the corner of the study with an expression of watching a good show and lazily said with a smile, "Yao, to be able to scare Chief Steward Mo to this extent, it really is not good." Before he finished speaking, Chief Steward Mo had already reached the door of the study and said to Mo Xiuyao with a pale face, Princess has gone missing in the palace." Feng Zhiyao was stunned and immediately jumped up and shouted, "How is this possible? Why would he suddenly disappear from the palace?" The two of them simultaneously turned to look at Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao seemed to be in a daze. When the two of them looked over, he slowly placed the book back on the table. He asked in a deep voice, "What's going on?" Chief Steward Mo said with a trembling voice, "After Wang Fei had an audience with His Majesty, Yi Zhaoyi of Yaohua Palace sent someone to invite Wang Fei over, saying that she had something to ask of you." By the time the shadow guard arrived, the entire Yaohua Palace was already on fire. Yi Zhaoyi and the sixth prince died in the fire, and the princess is missing. Mo Xiuyao leaned against the wheelchair, closed his eyes and asked in a deep voice, "Where did Qing Wan and Qing Yu go?" Qing Wan and Qing Yu are also missing. Mo Jingqi's face was gloomy. He stared at everyone present, his eyes crazily flashing with suspicion and ferocity. He didn't care if Yi Yu and the newborn little prince were burned to death, but if there was a princess consort of Ding among them, then he couldn't help but care. Mo Jingqi never thought that someone would take advantage of a loophole in his palace. Yes, as soon as it happened, Mo Jingqi was alerted that this was not an ordinary accident. This was a conspiracy against him. The princess consort of Ding died in the palace, and she was summoned in by him. Mo Jingqi didn't dare to imagine how big of a storm it would cause if the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry fought over this matter. Although he had sent his trusted subordinates to warn the guards of the capital at the first moment of the incident, his heart was still unsettled. His gaze fell on the Empress Dowager sitting on the side, and Mo Jingqi's gaze became more complicated. If Mo Jingqi was asked who he suspected, the first person he suspected was his Empress mother. Growing up by the Empress Dowager's side, he naturally understood his mother's character of doing anything to achieve her goals. And from the worship and admiration of the past to the unbearable present, Mo Jingqi didn't want to admit that he was still somewhat afraid of the Empress Dowager. Looking at Mo Jingli sitting on the side indifferently, the anger in Mo Jingqi's eyes gradually faded. He couldn't lose his composure now. There were more difficult people to deal with later. And he was the emperor. He couldn't shrink back. Prince Ding has arrived. The last time the people present saw Mo Xiuyao was last June. At that time, other than being unable to walk, Mo Xiuyao was no different from a normal person, and it made many people more or less worried. But a few months later, there was news that Prince Ding was seriously ill, and the Ding Palace closed its doors to visitors like in previous years. This made many people's worried hearts slowly relax. It was the beginning of spring, and the weather in Chu capital was still chilly. Mo Xiuyao sat in a wheelchair and was pushed in by Ah Jin. He was wearing a light green cloak with silver threads, and the collar revealed the white imperial robes embroidered with silver dragons. Even though half of his face was covered by the mask, it could still be seen that Mo Xiuyao's complexion wasn't good. His unusually pale complexion showed that he was still ill. Finally, send someone who knows medicine to check the bodies of Princess Yi Zhaoyi and the sixth prince. The old eunuch didn't feel strange about Mo Xiuyao's order. His wrinkled old face was still calm. He respectfully said, "This subordinate will follow your order. I will not disappoint the prince." Mo Xiuyao snorted and lightly said, "I won't pursue this matter. If the rest of the things can't be done well, you don't have to come to see I again." "Thank you, Prince." This subordinate will take his leave. "Princess Li, I know you'll be fine." "You'll be fine." Yi Li woke up in the darkness, only feeling a throbbing pain in her head. Yi Li couldn't help but smile bitterly. In the end, she was still careless. Even though she knew Mo Jingqi was afraid of the Ding family, she was still certain that he wouldn't dare to touch the Ding family's consort in the palace. But she didn't expect Yi Yu to do this to her. Yi Li didn't immediately open her eyes. She quietly laid on the bed for a while. After confirming that there was no one around her, she slowly opened her eyes. The situation seemed to be much better than what Yili had expected. At least, she was not imprisoned in a dark cell, but in a room that seemed to be well decorated. The room was decorated according to the style that the noble ladies in the capital liked. The furnishings in the room were elegant and luxurious. Even the windows were covered with the favorite misty gauze that the noble ladies liked. Yili sat up, leaning against the bedpost and smiling bitterly. Her body was soft. It seemed that Yi Yu had really poisoned her. It was no wonder that the other party dared to put her in such a defenseless room. There wasn't even a guard. They were sure that with her weak body, it would be difficult for her to even walk to the door. Chapter 153. With a creak, the door outside the screen was pushed open and a green-clothed girl came in with something. Seeing Yili sitting by the bed, she smiled in surprise and said, "Miss, you're finally okay." Yili looked at her and frowned slightly. "Where is this place? How long have I been sleeping?" The green-clothed girl put the thing in her hand on the table and said with a smile, "Miss has been sleeping here for more than 2 days. Miss must be hungry since you haven't eaten for 2 days. Xiaoyun has prepared some porridge, do you want to eat some first?" Yili calmly looked at the girl who cleverly served a bowl of porridge with a faint fragrance to Yili. Yili raised her hand and raised her eyebrows. "How am I supposed to eat like this?" She could sit up now because she was leaning against the pillar at the head of the bed. Even raising her hand was very difficult. How was she supposed to eat while holding her bowl? The green-clothed girl smiled apologetically at Yili and said, "It's Xiaoyun who forgot." "Xiaoyun will feed Mississippi." Yili lowered her eyes and said softly, "Then I'll have to trouble Mississippi. Xiaoyun is just a servant." "Miss, you don't have to be so polite." The girl called Xiaoyun had a quiet smile. She sat by Yili's bed and carefully fed her the porridge. Yili was a little unhappy to be served as a seriously ill person, but she was not a person who would abuse herself. She had been hungry for 2 days and didn't eat because of her so-called pride. She was looking for trouble. As for this girl who claimed to be a servant, if she was just an ordinary servant, she was an idiot. After eating, Yili's strength still hadn't recovered. Xiaoyun called a servant to come in and clean up the dishes. She stayed in the room and walked around busily. Yili looked at her, who seemed to be busy but was actually not doing anything. She said lightly, "If you have nothing to do, you can find a place to sit down. I'm dizzy from all the shaking." Xiaoyun did not feel embarrassed at being exposed at all. She giggled and said, "Our young master is afraid that young lady will be bored alone and wants Xiaoyun to accompany young lady." Yili smiled faintly and said, "Your young master is considerate. Please thank him for me." Xiaoyun nodded and blinked her eyes playfully. "Young master will be very happy to hear you say that." Yili smiled and didn't say anything. She quietly leaned against the headboard and listened to Xiaoyun ramble on and on about other people's business. This girl named Xiaoyun was definitely well trained, and it was not easy to get anything out of her. Instead, it would make her more vigilant. Since she was still unable to move, Yili decided not to waste her time. After staying in the room for 2 days, Xiaoyun's hidden vigilance when she looked at Yili finally faded a little. After eating breakfast, Yili casually asked, "I want to go out for a walk, is that okay? I feel like I'm going to be stiff after lying down for 2 days." Xiaoyun hesitated for a moment before agreeing. She then called the 2 maidservants over to help Yili walk around the garden. After 2 days, Yili finally stepped out of the room. She couldn't help but take a deep breath of fresh air. Her depressed mood instantly improved. Yili let the 2 little maidservants support her as they walked in the small garden. She inadvertently looked around the courtyard. This courtyard was not large. Looking at the little buds that had just sprouted from the tree, Yili smiled faintly. "Help me sit in the garden for a while. Is your young master not here right now?" Yili pointed at the stone table and chair in front of her. The 2 servant girls had clearly been told beforehand. They obediently followed Yi Li's instructions and helped her sit at the stone table. However, they were not willing to answer her question. Yi Li did not care about this. She leaned against the table in a good mood and looked at the flowers and plants in the garden. It was just the beginning of spring and there were no beautiful scenes of flowers blooming. The north was colder than the south. Many flowers and plants had just sprouted. Yi Li seemed to be curiously looking at a cluster of inconspicuous yellow flowers blooming in the flower bed closest to her. She bent down and was just about to reach out to pick it when a slightly cold hand grabbed her hand. Yi Li raised her head to look at Xiaoyun, who had suddenly appeared in front of her. She raised an eyebrow in confusion. Xiaoyun smiled and said, "Miss, this little flower looks pretty, but it is poisonous. So, it is best if you don't touch it." Yi Li frowned. She looked at the small flower buds and said, "I see that this is the only flower in the entire garden. Although it looks unremarkable, it looks delicate. I didn't expect it to be poisonous." Xiaoyun smiled with a bit of pride. Sometimes, the more unremarkable a flower is, the more poisonous it is. Compared to those beautiful flowers that make people wary, this unremarkable flower is a true treasure. Yi Li smiled and shook her head. What kind of treasure is a poisonous flower? If Miss Xiaoyun likes flowers, I have a few pots of top-quality orchids in my residence. They are blooming right now. I can give one to Xiaoyun. Xiaoyun's eyes flashed with a strange light. She smiled at Yi Li and said, "Xiaoyun has forgotten that Miss has a noble status. Naturally, you won't be interested in these unremarkable things. However, the flowers and plants in this courtyard are a bit dangerous. If Miss likes them, Xiaoyun will get people to change the flowers and plants in this courtyard to ones that Miss likes." Yi Li smiled and shook her head. "That won't be necessary. Exotic flowers and plants have their own unique beauty. Ordinary flowers and plants also have their own style. Moreover, I don't plan on staying here for long. So, I won't trouble you to take care of the garden." Xiaoyun smiled. "Young master told us to take good care of Mississippi. Just tell Xiaoyun what Miss likes. If young master finds out that Miss isn't living well, this servant won't be able to bear the consequences." Yi Li's beautiful eyes turned and said with a faint smile, "Although I haven't met your young master, I still have to thank him. Since it's like this. I originally planned to go see the peach blossoms with my husband this year. I'm afraid we can't go now. Can I trouble Miss to pick a few for me when the peach blossoms bloom?" Xiaoyun clearly didn't think that Yi Li's request would be so simple. She smiled and said, "Of course. Xiaoyun promises to let Miss see the earliest peach blossoms this year. What else does Miss need? Xiaoyun will get people to bring it back." Seeing Xiaoyun agree to her request, the smile on Yi Li's face became much more sincere. She smiled and said, "If it's possible, help me bring some cosmetics back. I want the best cosmetics in the capital. I want jasmine-scented ones." "Jasmine?" Xiaoyun was startled. Yi Li smiled apologetically. "This is more ordinary, but I like the smell. I'll have to trouble Miss Xiaoyun." Xiaoyun shook her head and said, "No, Xiaoyun will definitely help Miss achieve what you want." Yi Li smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble Mississippi." Watching Xiaoyun leave, Yi Li leisurely leaned against the stone table and breathed in the fresh air. Her smiling gaze faintly fell on the flowers and plants in the flower bed that were still a bit depressed. The smile in her eyes became even more joyful. Ding Qingfu's study Mo Xiuyao looked indifferently at the files in front of him. He raised his head and asked Feng Zhiyao, who was standing at the side, "What news is there from the palace?" Chapter 155. The man snorted and said, "The women of the Yi family, no matter if they look smart or stupid, they all like to think they are infallible. It doesn't take much effort to get her to help. Yi Li, have you guessed when the king's palace will announce your death?" Unless they see my corpse, the king's palace will not announce my death. Yi Li said. A woman who thinks she is infallible. Do you think Mo Xiaoyao values you that much? The man's voice was filled with anger. Yi Li was not angry, but her laughter had a bit of ridicule. Whether Mo Xiaoyao values me or not, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with your distinguished self. Do you really not plan on coming out to meet me, or are you disfigured? Mo Jingli. The person behind the screen seemed to be stunned for a moment. The room was silent for a while, and then there was a burst of unbridled laughter. The person behind the screen sat up and laughed loudly. Yi Li, I really did underestimate you. The man who walked out from behind the screen was tall and straight. His handsome face gave people a cold feeling even when he was smiling. Who else could it be but Mo Jingli? Yi Li sat up and looked at Mo Jingli indifferently. Don't most people in the capital look down on Prince? Mo Jingli sneered and said, you're not surprised at all. It seems like you're not part of that majority. Yi Li helplessly frowned and looked at Mo Jingli. Clearly I'm part of that majority. Otherwise, I would not have provoked Prince. Most likely. I wouldn't be in this situation now. Mo Jingli snorted and moved in front of Yi Li. He looked down at her and asked, do you regret it? I already told you that going against I will not have a good ending. Mo Xiaoyao can't save you. Did Prince give me a choice? Yi Li raised her eyebrows. In Prince's mind, it's perfectly justifiable for you to break off the engagement and ruin my reputation. But I'm slapping Prince in the face by finding a better partner for myself? Your Highness King Li. Who do you think you are? Mo Jingli flicked his sleeves and retreated. He stared at Yi Li with a sinister and domineering gaze. Yi Li, you've always been good at making I angry. Yi Li sighed and raised her soft hand. Prince has been acting mysterious for so long. Now you should tell me why you've brought me here, right? When did you find out about I's identity? Mo Jingli asked instead of answering. Yi Li smiled. There aren't many people in the capital who have enmity with me. There are even fewer people who have enmity with me and have the guts to kidnap people in the imperial palace. And the only person who is willing to take this risk and still able to succeed, I think it's only His Highness. Mo Jingli was clearly not as irritable as he usually was. Hearing Yi Li's words, he walked to the side and sat down. He looked at Yi Li leisurely. Why do you think I is willing to take this risk? Yi Li indifferently said, something happened to Ding Wangfei in the imperial palace. No matter if it was done by the emperor or not, it's still the emperor's responsibility. Even if Ding Wangfu doesn't find trouble with the emperor, I'm afraid that the officials in the imperial court and the people's evaluation of the emperor will be very different. Isn't that right? Mo Jingli was in a good mood. He raised his eyebrows. That's right. Emperor Gige has lost all his face this time. You think I don't know that Mo Xiaoyao wants I to fight with Emperor Gige so that he can reap the benefits? I want him to take action first. Ding Wangfei has gone missing in the imperial palace. I don't believe that he can still sit still. You see, these few days, he has caused quite a bit of trouble for my Emperor Gige. Prince is very pleased with himself. Don't tell me I shouldn't be pleased. Mo Jingli smiled at Yi Li. Mo Xiaoyao thinks I will be the fool who was fooled by him when we were young. So what if he knows that Emperor Gige didn't do it? Even if it's for Prince Ding's reputation and face, he still has to find trouble with Emperor Gige for I. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. What if he knows that Prince Gige is the one who did it? Do you think I will give him this chance? I feel like he's already suspecting you, Yi Li silently said in her heart. You don't seem to be curious at all about what I plan to do with you. Mo Jingli looked at Yi Li with a frown. Yi Li looked up at him. Using me to threaten Mo Xiaoyao? I feel like I don't seem that important. Mo Jingli looked at her and nodded. To be honest, I also have some doubts about your value in Mo Xiaoyao's heart. So, for the time being, I don't plan on using you to make a deal with Mo Xiuyao. Also, I suddenly thought of a more interesting method. I'm all ears. Yi Li looked at him with indifference. Yi Li's indifference did not affect Mo Jingli's high spirits. His satisfied gaze circled around Yi Li's body. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and said, "Last time at Beauty's Lake, I still remember it clearly. Actually, I was just joking at the time, but now I suddenly feel like this is a pretty good idea. If one day the entire world knows that Mo Xiuyao's princess is Ai's woman, what do you think will happen?" As if he thought of a beautiful future, Mo Jingli smiled proudly. "At that time, you idiot will be killed by Mo Xiuyao." Yi Li did not doubt that Mo Xiuyao had the ability to use the blood of his enemies to wash away the humiliation he had suffered. If a person in Mo Xiuyao's condition could persist and not be knocked down after experiencing such a hopeless situation, then he would definitely be able to do whatever he wanted to do. This kind of person was also the most terrifying enemy. "Yi Li, don't you think this is a good idea?" "That's right, I'll have to trouble Prince to send us off. Xiao Yun's medicine has no effect on you." Mo Jingli stared at her. Yi Li shook her head, "It's effective, but the time limit has passed." She wouldn't tell him that she had also used the weeds in the garden to make an antidote. Although it wasn't completely effective, the so-called muscle softening powder wasn't too bad. Just now, Yi Li smiled and looked at Mo Jingli in a happy mood. "If you acted rashly, I plan to remove your hands. As for this, you don't have to worry, there's no poison in my hands. Don't tell me I'm not worried that I'll accidentally cut my skin." Mo Jingli was silent for a while before he finally gritted his teeth. "This time I lost. Actually, Prince doesn't need to be too calculative, I didn't win either. Now, Prince, please." Humph. When an E and an San led Mo Jingli out of the room, Miss Xiao Yun also rushed out of the room at the same time. A pair of pretty eyes stared at Yi Li, who was following behind her, almost bursting into flames. "Let go of Gongzi." Behind her, an heir and an Si quietly jumped down from the wall. "Greetings to Wang Fei." Yi Li waved her hand to indicate that there was no need for formalities. She smiled at Miss Xiao Yun. "Miss Xiao Yun, I'm indebted to you for taking care of me these past few days." Xiao Yun stared at her and gritted her teeth. "What do you want to do?" "Let go of the prince and this miss will spare your lives." Yi Li hid behind Mo Jingli and pretended to be afraid. "Oh, Miss Xiao Yun, don't scare me, Ai's consort is very timid." "So, Miss Xiao Yun, it's best if you put away your dangerous little things. If Ai's consort isn't careful." Yi Li raised her hand and her sharp fingernails drew a line of blood on Mo Jingli's neck. She blinked innocently at Xiao Yun. "Here, like this. If I accidentally poke a hole in Prince's neck, can Miss Xiao Yun repair it?" "You." Xiao Yun saw Yi Li smiling as she rubbed the blood on her finger on Mo Jingli's clothes. Her face turned red with anger. But she quickly calmed down and gave a pure and pleasant smile to Yi Li. "Miss, Prince invited you here out of kindness. You can leave if you want, but you're holding Prince hostage. Is this the etiquette of a guest?" Yi Li smiled and said, "I didn't think that not only is Miss Xiao Yun cute, you're also familiar with the etiquette of the Central Plains. But putting tendon softening powder in a guest's food every day isn't the way to treat a guest, right?" The emphasis on the word Central Plains etiquette made Xiao Yun's expression change slightly. She habitually looked towards Mo Jingli. Yi Li didn't plan on stalling for time. She looked at Xiao Yun with a cold smile and said, "I'll have to trouble Miss Xiao Yun to prepare a few fast horses. Also, it's said that this consort's 2 maids are missing. I'll have to trouble you to send them back. Otherwise, this consort can't guarantee that this consort will be able to return Prince unharmed." Xiao Yun finally put away the smile on her face. Her delicate little face was filled with malice. "Prince is Dechu State's kingly. If you hurt him, don't even think about escaping responsibility. Yili raised her brows and said with a smile, "You're saying it like you don't know that I's consort is the Chu state's consort. Kidnapping I's consort, even if it's your kingly, he won't be able to escape responsibility. If you're smart, then immediately do as I say. Otherwise, even if I can't leave, I can guarantee that your kingly will die a horrible death. And San, if anyone dares to act rashly, just greet kingly. There's no need to be polite. If anything happens, this consort will take responsibility." And San excitedly replied in a clear voice, "This subordinate will follow your orders." Mo Jingli gave a cold snort and said, "You don't need to threaten Xiao Yun, get someone to do as she says. I will personally send them out." Xiao Yun was a bit hesitant and wanted to object, but seeing San's cold dagger on Mo Jingli's waist, she swallowed her words. Staring at Yili, she warned, "If anything happens to Prince, even if you go to the ends of the earth, I won't let you go." Yili smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm not interested in your prince. But you, be careful, don't let me see you again." And San brought along Mo Jingli whose acupuncture points were sealed. The other 3 guards walked out of the courtyard beside Yili. Before, the 4 of them had silently taken down many guards. Now that they were swaggering out, no one came forward to be an eyesore. Outside the gate, there were several horses parked outside. An E and an heir went forward to check and nodded to Yili. Yili ordered, "And San, take kingly. Let's go." Chapter 159. After the morning court the next day, Imperial Censor Su took his wife and several nephews out of the city to Jingling Temple to burn incense. At this time, it did not attract too much attention. After all, the Su family's love for their nieces was obvious to all in the capital. In the past, Imperial Censor Su had not hesitated to go against the Shangshu Fu and Prince Li in order to stand up for his niece. After that, when Princess Ding married, the young masters of the Su family all came out to send off their cousin. Now that Princess Ding had mysteriously disappeared in the fire, it was normal for the Su family to go to the temple to burn incense and pray for Princess Ding. And people like the Emperor or Prince Li who might pay attention to this matter were dizzy from the waves caused by Princess Ding's disappearance. They naturally did not have the time to pay attention to whether their officials were resting at home or going to the temple to burn incense after court. As Yi Li's close friend and the future second madam of the Su family, Qin Zheng also went with Madame Su. She was truly worried about her missing friend. After entering Jingling Temple, she accompanied Madame Su to worship all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the temple. Madame Su was more and more satisfied with this gentle and pleasant future daughter-in-law. After praying to Buddha, Madame Su went to the side room to rest. Qin Zheng dismissed the maidservants and chanted sutras and prayed alone in the silent hall. However, she was startled by a clear voice in her ear. "Miss Qin." Qin Zheng was shocked. Turning back, she saw a handsome youth dressed in moon-white cloth standing beside her. Qin Zheng frowned. She felt that the young man smiling at her was strangely familiar, but she was sure that she did not know this young man. "May I know who young master is? Why are you here?" Qin Zheng stood up and stared warily at the youth in front of her. She silently took a few steps to the side. Yi Li saw this and smiled faintly in her heart. She pretended not to know. Lifting her clothes, she knelt on the mat in front of the Buddha statue and prayed like Qin Zheng. He turned back to look at Qin Zheng, who was looking at him, and smiled. "I'm naturally here to pray. Miss Qin, don't be nervous. This one and second young master Su are old acquaintances. I'll have to trouble you to tell second young master Su that this one's surname is Chu Junwei." Qin Zheng was startled for a moment and seemed to understand something. She nodded calmly and said to Yi Li, "I understand. I will pass on your message." "Then, thank you, Miss Qin," Yi Li said with a smile. Yili was resting in the back hall of the Buddha Hall. This was a Buddha hall in the Jingling Temple that was rarely visited. It was located in a remote area, and the Buddha worshipped was not very prominent. Therefore, other than the young Buddhist monks who were sweeping, very few people came here. Do they need a Wang Fei like you to personally go to such a far place? Don't tell me. Go and explain to your grandfather and eldest uncle. Second uncle. Yili looked at her own dressing. She really couldn't act like a spoiled girl. She could only look innocently at second uncle. Eldest brother is also there. Second uncle doesn't need to worry about my safety. Does Prince Ding know what you mean? Su Hongyan asked. Yili felt a little guilty. She still hadn't met Mo Xiuyao. What does Yili want to do in Nanjiang? Su Qingze looked at Yili and hit the nail on the head. Yili glanced at him grumpily but still answered honestly, now the situation in Nanjiang is worse than Jing City. I don't feel at ease with eldest brother alone in Nanjiang. It just so happens that Jing City doesn't need me to show my face for the time being. I want to go to Nanjiang to take a look. Su Hongyan frowned. Your eldest brother has a sense of propriety and will act according to his capabilities. What can a girl like you help with? As for Jing City, Prince Ding intends to use your disappearance to make the Emperor and Empress Dowager fight? They were already fighting fiercely, but they shouldn't have dragged the Ding Wang Fu into it. Yili frowned. The Ding Wang Fu can't wait to be schemed against forever. Uncle must know why eldest brother went to Nanjiang. If Nanjiang isn't stable, the entire Dechu state might fall into the flames of war. Since Li has already married into the Ding Wang Fu, the Ding Wang Fu's position is Li position. I can't just sit in my boudoir and ignore everything like the other noblewomen. Other people won't give me this chance, right? Su Hongyan frowned. You take care of the Wang Fu's matters and let Prince Ding have no worries. You have already fulfilled your responsibility as a Wang Fei. Since we are husband and wife, we should share trials and tribulations together. Prince's body is inconvenient and he can't travel far. What's wrong with me doing what he can't do? Yili firmly said. Yili occasionally thought of Mo Xiuyao's words and felt uneasy. If the situation in Nanjiang went out of control and developed into the situation they expected, Mo Xiuyao would have to personally lead the troops without caring about his body. Yili didn't dare to imagine that with Mo Xiuyao's body, if he really went to war, he wouldn't be able to come back alive. There was also Su Qingchen. Young Master Qing Chen's intelligence was unparalleled. But even if the Su family was a 100-years-old clan, in terms of bodyguards, they couldn't be compared to the imperial Wang Fu. And Yili clearly knew that Su Qingchen was a weak young master who didn't know martial arts. Yili played with the warm jade in her hand. It was a dragon yazi carved from the highest quality mutton fat white jade. Even though it was carved from warm white jade, one could still feel the domineering aura of a dragon and the cold killing intent of a yazi. Yili held it in her hand and looked at Mo Xiuyao. This? Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly. This is an ancestral jade pendant. I wanted to give it to Lili a long time ago. Don't lose it. It's the same as the cloud-grasping sword. They're both family heirlooms. Yili was speechless. She silently put away the jade pendant. Seeing Yili's figure disappear into the forest, the warm smile on Mo Xiuyao's face gradually disappeared. He looked down at his crippled legs. His indifferent eyes were filled with anger and unwillingness. Bang! With a wave of his hand, a large tree nearby snapped. Mo Xiuyao coughed a few times. His face was tired as he leaned against his wheelchair. You really are trash. With Prince's current body, it's best not to get angry so easily. Shen Yang walked out of the forest and frowned as he looked at the tree trunk on the ground. Mo Xiuyao walked in front of him. As expected, he saw that the white handkerchief in his hand was stained red. Ajin followed behind Shenyang and looked worriedly at Mo Xiuyao. Wang Fei is a very special woman. Prince should feel happy that he has married such a Wang Fei. Looking in the direction that Yi Li had left, Shenyang said thoughtfully. Mo Xiuyao said coldly, "You say that I should feel happy that my Wang Fei is in danger?" Shenyang looked at the hand that was clenched on his knee and said in a rare tone of an elder, "Even though this may hurt Prince's pride, but I feel that Wang Fei does not need Prince's protection. Wang Fei's present appearance is much more real and moving than her noble appearance in the Wang Fu, isn't it? Or is it that Prince Ding is like the common people and prefers a woman who is like a dodder flower that depends on you?" Chapter 161. That's enough. Mo Xiuyao said in a low voice, "I know what to do. Let's go back." Jin pushed Mo Xiuyao to the other side of the forest. Shenyang shook his head and followed. Prince Li's mansion. Mo Jingli sat in the study, his expression dark as he stared at the person kneeling in front of him. "You're saying that you still haven't found any trace of Yi Li?" The middle-aged man kneeling on the ground could clearly feel Mo Jingli's anger and secretly complained in his heart. "Prince, please forgive me. This subordinate has already sent people to carefully search the area within 100 li from where Princess Ding disappeared, but they haven't found any trace of Princess Ding." Mo Jingli snorted coldly. "Yi Li hasn't returned to the Prince Ding mansion, nor has she returned to the Yi family or the Su family. Could it be that she can fly and burrow into the ground?" The middle-aged man hurriedly said, "Prince, although we tampered with the horses, Princess Ding seems to have discovered this matter. She made the horses run in 2 directions, east and west, and drew our pursuers away. So you're telling I that your brains aren't as good as a woman's?" Mo Jingli sneered as he spat out mockery. The middle-aged man lowered his head in shame, but he couldn't help but complain in his heart, "Is Princess Ding an ordinary woman? It's not the first time that Prince has been unlucky in her hands, so it's understandable that they failed, right? Get out. Keep an eye on the Prince Ding mansion for I don't believe that Yi Li won't return." After chasing his subordinates out, Mo Jingli fell into deep thought. Yi Li not returning to the mansion after escaping was indeed out of Mo Jingli's expectations. But he didn't know whether he should be relieved or angry. This choice was like asking him to choose between facing the Ding king's residence and his brother, the emperor. If Yi Li returned to the Prince Ding mansion safely, then neither he nor Mo Xiuyao would be able to retreat. At that time, the one who would benefit would be his brother, the emperor, who was sitting high on the dragon throne. But now, Mo Xiuyao was busy looking for Yi Li and even caused trouble for him from time to time. He should take advantage of this opportunity, but if he and Mo Jingqi were both injured, "Prince, what's wrong? Are you in a bad mood?" A charming young girl walked out from the inner room and looked at Mo Jingli with a smile on her face. "Yi Li hasn't returned home yet. Your tracking drug is useless. Yi Li has already disappeared." Mo Jingli looked at the pretty and cute young girl in front of him and said in a deep voice. Xiao Yun, who had already changed out of her simple maid costume and appeared more charming, had a strange look in her eyes. She said in surprise, "This Princess Ding is quite capable. Even the most famous poison expert couldn't detect the soul-chasing incense I used." Just as San couldn't take it anymore, he finally stopped and said with a smile, "We're here." San let out a sigh of relief and raised his head to look at the roadside. Under the dim light of the night, by the side of the quiet lake, there stood a serene and elegant pavilion. On the plaque above the door, there were a few large words written like dragons and phoenixes, breeze and moon floor. As a shadow guard specially trained by the Ding King's Fu, San naturally knew what kind of place the wind and moon floor was. The #1 brothel in the world. It was said that this place had the most fragrant wine, the best food, and the most beautiful and talented women in the world. This was the land of warmth and tenderness that every man dreamed of and would rather not wake up from. Gongzi? Yili looked at him and smiled. What? The #1 brothel in the world isn't enough for you? And San grimaced, Gongzi, are we really going in? Yili smiled, do you think I'm taking you out for a walk? Let's go. Opening the fan in his hand, Yili smiled as he stepped into the wind and moon floor. Since the wind and moon floor could become the #1 brothel in the world, it naturally had its extraordinary aspects. Stepping into the lobby, what greeted them wasn't a vulgar brothel keeper with heavy makeup, but 2 young women with light eyebrows and delicate makeup. Seeing Yili wearing an ice blue brocade robe with silver embroidery and a top-quality jade pendant on his white belt, holding a fan in his hand and looking relaxed, it was clear that he had an extraordinary presence. They quickly came forward, greetings to Gongzi. This Gongzi looks unfamiliar. Is it your first time coming to the wind and moon floor? Yili smiled and nodded, that's right, this Gongzi just came to Jiangnan. I've admired the wind and moon floor for a long time and wanted to see it. The woman smiled, Gongzi's presence really brings light to my humble brothel. Gongzi, please come to the private room to enjoy the song and dance, and see if there's anything you like. Yili smiled, this Gongzi heard that your brothel doesn't only specialize in song and dance. Why don't you introduce some interesting things? This woman was in charge of the wind and moon floor's reception, so she was naturally an insightful person. Looking at Yili, although his clothing and bearing were extraordinary, he was definitely not older than 13 years old. 13-year-old immature youths were interested in fragrant and warm jade, but there were also some who hadn't been enlightened yet. Seeing the young Gongzi's noble and proud appearance, he must be some family's young Gongzi who came out to have fun. The woman covered her mouth and smiled, little Gongzi, if you don't like our moon floor's girls, they will be sad. Our moon floor's girls are indeed not only good at song and dance, but what does little Gongzi like? Chapter 163. Ru Mei's hand trembled, her face as white as paper. Gongzi is so strong. Ru Mei said with a bleak expression. Yili smiled but didn't say anything. In the past, for an undercover mission, she had specially learned gambling from a gambling king for several months. The other party had praised her for her talent. And with her eyesight and hearing, it was impossible for Ru Mei to cheat in front of her. Of course, Yili thought that in a place like the Wind and Moon Pavilion, the banker wouldn't cheat for a few hundred taels of silver. If that was the case, it would damage the reputation of Han Mingyue's Wind and Moon Pavilion too much. But if she continued to win, it wouldn't be certain. After all, Han Mingyue's reputation of loving money like his life was as famous as his Wind and Moon Pavilion. This Gongzi, our pavilion master, invites Gongzi inside for a chat. When Yili was hesitating whether to continue or not, a young man who looked like a manager walked out, cupping his hands and smiling at Yili. Yili's eyes turned and she said with a smile, Gongzi Mingyue has invited me, this Gongzi is also very fortunate. But, the Wind and Moon Pavilion won't murder for money, right? The young man's mouth twitched, his smile a bit forced, Gongzi is joking. Yili stood up and casually stuffed the banknotes into Ansan's hands. When she stood up again, she brushed her clothes and said with a smile, please lead the way. The young man led Yili and Ansan into the small courtyard behind the gambling house. Light muslin curled around the pavilion by the lake, the pleasant sound of a guqin flowing through. Pavilion master. Withdraw. Why doesn't this Gongzi come in for a chat? The sound of the guqin paused and a low and pleasant male voice came from the pavilion. Yili slightly raised her eyebrows when she heard it. Seeing the young man respectfully withdraw, Yili said with a smile, the pavilion master of the Wind and Moon Pavilion has invited me, this one is very fortunate. Finishing, she gave Ansan a look to stay outside and went forward to lift the layers of muslin curtains to walk in. In the pavilion, a handsome man dressed in dark red brocade robes was lazily leaning against the zither table. His handsome face was filled with an evil charm. Seeing Yili come in, he raised his eyebrows and smiled. I didn't expect that the one who could defeat Rume would be such a young master. What a rare young hero. May I dare to ask Gongzi's honorable surname and great given name? Yili laughed and said, how could I dare? A mere surname of Chu, Junwei. Chu Junwei. Good name. It's just that, this humble one has never heard of any young master surnamed Chu in the Chu state who has such a bearing. If you are from the Weiling Chu clan, you don't look like someone from the Weiling, Han Mingyue said as she stared at Yili. Yili did not mind. She casually found a place to sit down and said with a smile, we are just a small family. We do not dare to trouble young Master Mingyue to listen to us. Han Mingyue snorted and said, a small family? This young master doesn't look like one. Yili waved her fan and smiled calmly. What's so strange about that? This humble one also doesn't look like the legendary young Master Mingyue. Oh. Han Mingyue raised her eyebrows with interest, but a sharp light flashed in her eyes. I wonder what the young Master Mingyue you have heard of is like. Yili smiled and said, I have heard that young Master Mingyue is elegant and extraordinarily handsome. He is a rare fine young master in the world. Han Mingyue frowned in apparent dissatisfaction. Could it be that this young master has disappointed young Master Chu? Yili lowered her eyebrows and smiled. From what this humble one knows, young Master Mingyue would definitely not sit like this in front of strangers. Looking at the handsome man kneeling beside the zither table with a lazy and devilish air, Yili could not help but sigh in her heart. In terms of appearance, the brothers Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi were at least 80% alike. If they could really fool others, it would not be impossible to fool them. However, the person in front of her clearly had no intention of concealing himself. Or perhaps he did not think that a 13 or 14-year-old stranger had seen Han Mingyue in person. Unfortunately, not only had she seen Han Mingyue, but she had also seen Han Mingxi. It seems that young Master Chu is certain that this young master is not Han Mingyue. Han Mingxi stood up and stared at Yili with a cold gaze. Yili smiled and said, young master, why are you so angry? You tricked this humble one into coming here in the name of young Master Mingyue. Shouldn't I be the one who should be angry? Han Mingxi sneered. Young Master Chu, why are you putting on an act? Didn't you spend so much money in the Bright Moon Inn to attract the attention of the inn master? Why don't you tell this young master now? Perhaps this young master will agree to your request if I am in a good mood. Yili raised her eyebrows. Young master, can you make the inn master of the Wind and Moon Inn? Or, can you make the Tianyi Pavilion's decision? As soon as the words Tianyi Pavilion came out, Han Mingxi's gaze immediately shot toward Yili like a sword. His devilish handsome face suddenly became a bit colder. Who are you? There were many people in the world who knew about the Tianyi Pavilion, and even more people who knew about the Wind and Moon Inn. However, not many people knew that the inn master of the Wind and Moon Inn and the Tianyi Pavilion were the same person. Yili lowered her head and said, young master, before you ask me, you should at least tell me if I can make the decision or not. What if you can't make the decision after I've spent so much effort talking to you? Wouldn't that be a waste of each other's time? Han Mingxi glared at Yili and snorted. Han Mingyue is not in Jiangnan right now. Whether it is the Wind and Moon Inn or the Tianyi Pavilion, I can make the decision. Do you understand? Yili clapped her hands and said with a smile, that's good. Young master, may I know your name? Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi gritted his teeth. Of course, he wouldn't tell her what his nickname was. After all, the title of young Master Feng Yu was not a good one for both men and women. Yili raised a hand to rub between her brows and said in a low voice, so you are young Master Ming Yu's brother? No wonder you look so similar to young Master Ming Yu. You've seen my big brother? Han Mingxi stared at her and asked with a frown. Yili didn't change her expression and said with a smile, well. I saw young Master Mingyu once when he was young. I have a good memory and have always admired young Master Mingyu's elegance. Han Mingxi curled his lips. His big brother was indeed quite famous when he was young. However, that was in the Chu capital, so the people of Jiangnan didn't know much about him. However, was this young man in front of him 5 years old? Yili didn't care what Han Mingxi was thinking. I've come from afar and you won't even give me a cup of tea. This is not how you treat a guest. Han Mingxi stared at her for a moment and then slowly pulled out a sinister smile. If you want to drink tea, you can. If you have something to ask of me, you can. But you'll have to defeat me first. Yili looked at young Master Feng Yu, who was staring at her with a provocative expression, and secretly found it funny. Of course, she knew that Han Mingyue wasn't in Jiangnan right now. She even knew where Han Mingyue had gone. Although Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi were brothers, Han Mingxi was clearly much easier to deal with than Han Mingyue. For various reasons, Yili didn't want to meet Han Mingyue. What does young Master Han want to bet? Han Mingxi raised his eyebrows and smiled. I won't take advantage of you. Weren't you very powerful just now? Let's bet on the dice and see who's bigger. Yili raised her eyebrows and didn't object. Okay. He believed that if his brother who loved money as much as his life was here, he would have a lot to talk about with him. Opening a aromatic elegance pavilion in each town seemed to be a great idea. Han Mingxi started to imagine if he could open a Breeze and Moon restaurant in each town, then, I advise young Master Han not to think that way. Otherwise, I'm afraid young Master Mingyue will be angry. Seeing Han Mingxi holding his chin and looking outside the pavilion with shining eyes, Yili guessed what he was thinking. She quickly stopped him. The Breeze and Moon restaurant could only become the #1 restaurant in the world because it was unique. If he opened it everywhere, it wouldn't be so wonderful. She didn't believe that Han Mingyue didn't open brothels in other places. It was just that they weren't that famous. Moreover, the brothel business didn't require much skill. Perhaps one could become a leader in it, but it was hard to say that one could completely dominate it. Cosmetics and spices are consumables, but the Breeze and Moon restaurant, that's for entertainment. Aren't the two completely different? But I think that we can cooperate on this point. Han Mingxi was just being impulsive. If he really opened a Breeze and Moon restaurant all over the Dechu state, he probably wouldn't be able to stand it and run away. Hearing Yi Li's words, he didn't have any objections. He raised his eyebrows to show that he was all ears. Yi Li said with a smile, for example, the spices and cosmetics used by the ladies of the Breeze and Moon restaurant can be purchased from the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion. What does young Master Han think? As a show of sincerity for our first cooperation, I can give young Master Han a special fragrance that will be provided for free for an unlimited period of time. How about it? Han Mingxi pondered for a moment. He raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, young Master Chu is so sincere. If I don't agree, wouldn't I be pushing the business out of the door? Very good. What information does young Master Chu need? I think it will make young Master feel that it's worth it. Yi Li nodded with satisfaction, very good. Then why don't young Master Han prepare first? I also need to make some preparations. Let's meet again in a few days and sign a contract. It's a deal. Leaving the Breeze and Moon restaurant, and San finally let out a sigh of relief when they returned to an inconspicuous small courtyard in Guangling City where the 5 of them were temporarily staying. In front of his brothers who were looking at him strangely, and San expressionlessly took out a thick stack of silver banknotes and threw it on the table. An heir who was responsible for managing the silver raised his eyebrows in shock. Where did you get so much banknotes? They had only brought 20,000 taels out of Jing. This Wang Fei took Xiao Sen out for a walk and it was 10 times that. And San looked at Yili, who was sitting on the side and drinking tea with a fan. He said woodenly, "We won it at the gambling house." Finishing, he looked with lingering fear at Yili and said, "Young master, this subordinate didn't think that we would be able to walk out safely from there." Yili glanced at him and said with a smile, "Don't worry. If the Breeze and Moon restaurant makes trouble for us for a mere 200,000 taels, then it won't be very good." A mere 200,000 taels. Even if the Breeze and Moon restaurant earned 200,000 taels a day, it definitely wasn't a small amount. Breeze and Moon restaurant. An air, and Ansan's lips twitched. They all decided to forget about this matter. They were Wang Fei's shadow guards, so they definitely would not tell the prince that Wang Fei had taken Ansan to a brothel. Yili wasn't in a hurry to find Han Mingxi. If she wanted to completely cover her tracks, she needed intelligence from Nanjiang. In reality, Yili hadn't planned on finding Tianyi Pavilion. Even though Han Mingxi and Han Mingyue seemed to be easy to get along with, even though she had only met them once, Yili knew that Han Mingyue, that gentle Gongzi, was more than 10 times harder to deal with than his flower thief younger brother. If she didn't know that Han Mingyue wasn't in Dechu state recently, Yili definitely wouldn't have come into contact with Han Mingxi. However, even though Han Mingxi didn't seem very reliable, Tianyi Pavilion's intelligence network was still very fast. When Yili had just finished walking around Guangling City, Han Mingxi had already come to her door. Seeing Han Mingxi, who was wearing a dark red robe and constantly exuding a seductive aura, leisurely sitting in the parlor and teasing the servant girl who brought tea over, Yili waved her hand to dismiss the red-faced servant girl. She said with a smile, "Not seeing you for a few days, young Master Han is still as elegant as ever." Han Mingxi said with a smile, "Not at all. But young Master Chu, do you find the spring scenery of Guangling pleasing to your eyes?" Yili didn't expect Han Mingxi to not send people to monitor her. She wasn't angry and smiled calmly. "The ancient capital of 3 dynasties, the scenery is picturesque. How can it not be pleasing to my eyes?" Han Mingxi said with a smile, "Speaking of which, young Master Chu forgot something a few days ago. I happened to be here today, so I brought it over. It will also show my sincerity in cooperating." Chapter 166. Yili raised her eyebrows in confusion and looked at Han Mingxi, who was smiling maliciously. Han Mingxi raised his hand and clapped lightly. Not long after, a beautiful woman dressed in purple appeared at the door. "This lowly concubine Rume greets young master and young Master Chu." This woman was Miss Rume, who was the banker at the gambling house a few days ago. Yili suddenly had a bad feeling. "Young Master Han, this is..." Han Mingxi opened his folding fan with a swoosh. Half of his handsome face was hidden behind the folding fan. He smiled and said, "The rules of the Wind and Moon House are that whoever wins gets to be the banker. Young Master Chu's gambling skills are superb and even Rume is convinced." From today onwards, Rume was no longer a member of the Wind and Moon Inn, nor was she a member of the Wind and Moon Inn. She belongs to young Master Chu. If young Master Chu likes her, you can take her as a concubine. If you don't like her, she can be a servant girl who serves tea, does the laundry, and cooks. Seeing Han Mingxi smiling ambiguously and winking at her, Yili felt a headache coming on. Young Master Han is too polite. I was just lucky. Besides, I didn't bet with Miss Rume alone. I didn't win against her. Therefore, you should take Miss Rume back. Han Mingxi closed her fan and casually tapped her palm. Does young Master Chu mean that you don't like Rume? Hearing Han Mingxi's words, Miss Rume's charming face turned pale. She looked at Yili with hidden bitterness and stood to the side with her head lowered, silently crying. Yili glared at Han Mingxi unhappily. Young Master Han, since everyone is sincere, why do you have to tease me like this? I have a strict upbringing. I can only thank young Master Han for his good intentions. Han Mingxi sighed and looked at Yili with a face full of resentment. Your heart is like iron. Forget it. Ru Mei, it seems that young Master Chu really doesn't think highly of you. You may leave. Ru Mei snorted softly. She stomped her foot and glared hatefully at Yi Li before turning around and leaving. Yi Li smiled bitterly in her heart. If she really did send a brothel girl back, not to mention how her grandfather and uncle would react, even Mo Xiuyao would fly into a rage. Mo Xiuyao. Yi Li sighed softly in her heart as she recalled the sadness in his eyes when he left, even though he tried his best to hide it. Is young Master Chu thinking of someone? Han Mingxi propped up his chin and stared curiously at Yi Li. If he wasn't mistaken, he saw some sort of longing or worry in this shrewd and mysterious youth's eyes. Is young Master Han here to discuss such private matters with this one? Yi Li glanced at him and asked indifferently. Han Mingxi shrugged and frowned indifferently. I have nothing to do now. There's no harm in talking about it. That's perfect. Why don't young Master Han also talk about his romantic past? I've been interested in dialogue books recently. Why don't I write one and call it The Biography of Young Master Fengyu? Yi Li smiled from the corner of her eyes. You're indeed very boring, Han Mingxi muttered. Since Chu Junwei knew about the relationship between the Wind and Moon Pavilion and the Tianyi Pavilion, then it wasn't so strange that he knew that young Master Ming Yu's younger brother, Han Mingxi, was the infamous young Master Fengyu. However, he didn't look down on him like most people would when he knew about his reputation. Han Mingxi felt that this person was rather interesting. We're considered acquaintances. Young master coming and going, that's boring. Why don't we just address each other by name? I'll call you Junwei. You can just call me Mingxi. Yi Li blinked lightly. Junwei. Mingxi. Why did she feel that this name was a bit strange? Brother Han. Yi Li stared at him warningly, reminding him that it was time to get down to business. Alright, Junwei, are you shy? Han Mingxi blinked his seductive eyes and smiled. Before Yi Li flared up, he put on a serious expression and said, I've roughly found the things you want. However, you also know that we're in the Dechu state. Most of the people you want to investigate are in Nanjiang. Thus, I only have a portion here. The rest will be delivered to you after you enter Nanjiang. However, I'm rather curious. Junwei, you're still young. Why would you want to go to Nanjiang for no reason? Even if you're going to travel, there doesn't seem to be a need to investigate the Nanzhao imperial family and the Saintess of Nanjiang. Yi Li's expression didn't change as she said, to tell you the truth, I'm going to Nanjiang to search for a medicine. This medicine seems to have something to do with the Nanzhao imperial family and Nanjiang. Han Mingxi raised his eyebrows and said somewhat jokingly, Junwei, you're generous, and I'm not stingy. What medicine do you want? Just tell me and I'll have someone get it for you. Why do you have to come all the way here? Don't tell me you want Nanjiang's treasure, the hidden Luoming flower. Yi Li nodded seriously. That's right. The smile on Han Mingxi's face froze. He sighed helplessly. You're also. The hidden Luoming flower is Nanjiang's treasure. It's personally guarded by the Saintess of Nanjiang. Not to mention ordinary people, even the Nanzhao king may not be able to take it. Junwei, are you sure you want to go? Yi Li nodded firmly. If not, why would I pay such a high price to buy information from the Tianyi Pavilion? The trip to Nanjiang is imperative, so I'll have to trouble Brother Han to help me prepare the information. Otherwise, if I don't come back, you'll have one less business partner. As far as I know, although the hidden Luoming flower is said to have the effect of bringing the dead back to life, I don't know if anyone has used it to bring the dead back to life. However, I do know that the people who want to take it have all died. Is Junwei someone you want to take it from? Han Mingxi asked worriedly. What kind of disease or poison is it? Maybe I can help you find out if there's any other way. Seeing Han Mingxi so worried, Yi Li felt a little guilty. She hurriedly said, "No need. I'm just doing my best. If I really can't do it, I won't take the risk to die." Han Mingxi nodded and said, "It's good that you think so. Nanjiang is not like the Central Plains. Even our Tianyi pavilion can't do anything in the southern border." "That's right. You're right. I understand. Thank you, Brother Han." Yili nodded and took out a delicate glass bottle from a box on the table. It was half filled with a light green liquid. "This is what I promised Brother Han. I hope Brother Han will be satisfied." Han Mingxi took it curiously. Once he opened the glass bottle, an elegant fragrance of flowers floated out and filled the hall. Han Mingxi said happily, "This is the fragrance of orchids. Although this smell doesn't seem to suit Brother Han's taste, we can only make do with it for now." Yili didn't quite understand why a man would make himself so fragrant. However, she still decided to respect the personal preferences of her new business partner. Han Mingxi didn't care at all. He held the glass bottle and couldn't put it down. "How can it be? It's really great. Thank you, Junwei." The cosmetics and fragrances for the Wind and Moon Pavilion and the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion that Junwei mentioned before are settled. In the future, all the cosmetics and fragrances for the Wind and Moon Pavilion will be ordered from the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion. Yili nodded and said with a smile, "Thank you, Brother Han." Chapter 167. No need to thank me, no need to thank me. We can be considered to be mutually beneficial. Junwei, can you give me something with a stronger scent next time? This seems to be much better than other fragrances. If we sell it in the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion, we'll definitely make more money. Yili's mouth twitched. This isn't easy to get. Including the bottle in Brother Han's hand, there are only 5 bottles in the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion. Also, Brother Han, I actually have a question I've always wanted to ask. Ask whatever you want. This brother will tell you everything he knows. Having received such a good item, Han Mingxi's mood was rarely good. He waved his hand without a care. Yili looked at him. "With your occupation, is it really convenient to make such a fragrant smell? If it was an ordinary household, it would be fine. If the flower was picked in a heavily guarded or martial arts household, as long as their nose wasn't broken, wouldn't they be able to smell it?" Han Mingxi stared blankly. It took him a while to understand what Yili meant by occupation. He unhappily glared at her. "You're still a little brat. You don't understand the elegance of a man. You don't know how much the beauties like this young master's fragrance." Yili was speechless. Did he think she had never seen a man before? The 5 brothers of the Su family, as well as Mo Xiuyao, Feng Zhiyao, and Mo Jingli. At most, they would only put some faint fragrances on their clothes, such as dragonfly, musk, or sandalwood. Probably because Mo Xiuyao stayed in the study for a long time, he only had a faint ink fragrance. She had never seen a man use such a showy fragrance. Why didn't he make himself into a big incense burner? After promising to see if she could concoct better fragrances for him when she returned from Nanjiang, she sent off the reluctant Han Mingxi. Yili then sat down to look at the things Han Mingxi had sent over. "Young master, when are we leaving for Nanjiang?" Dark 3 and Dark 4 fiddled with the things that Yili had just bought, while looking at Yili, who was sitting on the side looking at files. Yili didn't even raise her head as she stared at the file in her hand and said, "The matters in Guangling are more or less settled. We will leave the day after tomorrow. Take a look at these things as well." Casually tossing out a few pieces of paper, Dark 1 and Dark 2 caught them and sat down on the side to read them attentively. "Also, I'll be leaving the day after tomorrow. Only one of you can come with me." The 4 people simultaneously stopped what they were doing and looked in shock at Yili's calm face. "Wang Fei. Gongzi, this." An Yi said with a frown. Nanjiang couldn't compare to the Central Plains. They were unfamiliar with the place and it was too dangerous for the princess consort to bring only one person. Yili looked up at them with a smile and said, "Don't you think the 5 of us are very eye-catching? The people of southern border are very xenophobic. I'm afraid that our group will be targeted as soon as we enter southern border. But it's too dangerous for young master to bring only one person. If something happens." And San said, "Do you not believe in me or do you not believe in yourselves?" Yili asked with a raised brow. The 4 people looked at each other and couldn't say anything to refute. Yili said with a smile, "All right, it's decided. And San will come with me. And see, you stay behind and secretly watch Wind and Moon Restaurant. If Han Mingyue comes back or makes any movements, immediately send a message to me. Be careful and don't let him find you. And go to Shattered Snow Pass and find a way to infiltrate the military camp. If I don't send a message to you, you don't need to pay attention to anything else. No matter if you see any of us or the people in the Wangfu, just pretend you don't know. Secretly pay attention to the situation in Ling Province. And set out tonight and take my token to Nanjiang to find Dage. After you find him, just follow him." The 4 people saw that Yili had already planned this and could only nod in agreement. Yili smiled at them, "Unless it's absolutely necessary, you're not allowed to contact Jing. I think, you all know what it means to be absolutely necessary, right?" The 4 people helplessly agreed. And San had a bitter expression and drooped his head. The other 3 people also looked at him with sympathy. He would definitely be cut to pieces by the prince. Yili didn't have the mind to pay attention to the feelings of her subordinates. She stared at the file on the Saintess of Nanjiang and pondered. The Saintess of Nanjiang wasn't like she thought before, with no real power. On the contrary, the Saintess of Nanjiang had a considerable influence on Nanzhao's political affairs. In some aspects, she was even more influential than the Nanzhao royal family. However, the Saintess couldn't marry and have children. Every time a new Saintess appeared, the previous Saintess had to enter the Nanjiang sacred land to protect the hidden Luoming flower. She couldn't take a step out of the sacred land and couldn't see outsiders. So the threat to the royal power wasn't that sharp. The current Saintess was called Xu Manlin, 23 years old this year. According to Nanjiang's rules, the Saintess had to abdicate at the age of 28 at the latest. Yili frowned. She secretly guessed that the reason the Saintess of Nanjiang wanted to rebel was because of this. After all, a 28-year-old young woman who had enjoyed supreme honor was locked in some unknown sacred land. Moreover, she wasn't allowed to see outsiders. No matter who it was a very cruel thing. "Gongzi, are we really going to get the hidden Luoming flower?" And San saw Yili staring at the file on the Saintess of Nanjiang and couldn't help but ask curiously. Yili casually replied, "If we can get it, naturally it's good to get it. However, the affairs of Nanjiang still come first." Finally, she first asked whether the hidden Luoming flower was useful to Mo Xiuyao's body. Then she decided whether to go get it or not. Nanjiang had been a barbarian land since ancient times. Its customs were very different from the Central Plains. Its territory was full of poisonous insects, poisonous grass, fierce birds and beasts. The people of the Central Plains avoided it like the plague. 1,000 years ago, Nanjiang and the Central Plains were one. It was called Kuei Province in ancient times. In the late years of the previous dynasty, Nanzhao's royal family rose and established Nanzhao State. After that, Emperor Taizu established the Chu State and fought all his life. When Emperor Taizong was free, Nanzhao State had been established for over 100 years. Its foundation was stable. The Central Plains also urgently needed to recuperate after several decades of war. Nanjiang was officially independent of the Chu State's territory. Shattered Snow Pass was located at the border between Nanjiang and the Chu State's Yong Province. Although the two countries were at war, the people on the border still traded with each other. 30 li behind Shattered Snow Pass, Yonglin City often saw Nanjiang people dressed strangely going in and out. Yonglin City wasn't big. Because it was 200 li away from Yong Province's capital, Yong Province City, it didn't look prosperous. Apart from the people in the crowd who were obviously of different races, this place was just like an ordinary small town. Yili stood on the street that wasn't very wide. Looking at the peaceful people coming and going, she smiled faintly in her heart. In such an era, living in such a small border city, it was indeed very rare to have such peace and harmony. Or it should be said that the ability of the common people to adapt to life and the environment was always unexpected. And San stood next to Yili with his sword. He looked strangely at his master standing at the door of the inn and smiling strangely instead of going in. Gongzi, there don't seem to be many inns in Yonglin City. This one is already the best. Yili glanced at him and shook her head with a smile. Go in. It's not that I don't like the inn. After saying that, he took the lead and stepped into the seemingly simple and crude inn. And San raised an eyebrow. He also felt that Wang Fei wouldn't dislike the environment for being too bad. After all, there were times when they didn't reach the next town on the road. Sometimes, they would sleep in the wilderness. Also, when they were in Jing, there were places under Black Cloud Peak that even the Shadow Guard didn't want to set foot in, but Wang Fei went in without blinking. Chapter 168. Entering the inn, compared to the magnificent inns in the Chu capital and Guangling City, this small inn couldn't even be considered a third-rate inn. However, this was indeed the best inn in Yonglin City. There were only 7 or 8 tables in the lobby. At this time, 3 of the tables were already occupied. An old shopkeeper had his head down as he calculated the accounts at the counter. Although Yili was wearing a simple cotton dress, her age, appearance, and temperament, as well as the imposing San following behind her with a sword in his arms, attracted everyone's attention in the inn. At this time, whether it was sightseeing or doing business, it wasn't a good time, so the inn seemed a bit deserted. Yili walked to the counter and lightly knocked twice. The old shopkeeper trembled as he raised his head to look at Yili and San for a long time before asking, "Does young master want to stay?" Yili smiled, "Not staying, are we here to drink tea?" The old shopkeeper smiled and said, "What is young master's name? How many rooms do you want?" "2 upper rooms." The old shopkeeper called the waiter to bring the 2 to the room upstairs. After sending the waiter away, San skillfully checked the entire room. In this kind of small inn, even the upper rooms wouldn't be spacious or gorgeous. It was just a bed, a wardrobe, and a screen separating the tables and chairs outside. San stood by the door and watched Yili skillfully arrange her things. She frowned and asked, "Young master, when are we going to Nanjiang?" Yili put down her luggage and came out from behind the screen. She pointed to a chair on the side and indicated for San to sit. She smiled and said, "This kind of thing can't be rushed. I think we need a guide." For people who entered Nanjiang for the first time, it was simply playing with their lives if they didn't do enough homework. And Yili didn't like to take risks if it wasn't necessary. Guide? San didn't understand. Yili smiled and said, "Nanjiang is too mysterious for us in the Middle Earth. We're not familiar with the place and it's not easy to go. Finding a Nanjiang native or someone from the Chu state who is familiar with Nanjiang to lead the way is a good choice." Third Secret frowned, "But, bringing an outsider might drag us down." Yili tapped the table absent-mindedly with her fan and said, "That's why we still have to wait. I've already asked someone to find a guide. It's a pity that he seems to be 2 days later than us." Looking at San's puzzled expression, Yili smiled but didn't say anything. Indicating that San could go back to his room to rest, San knew his master's temper. If she didn't want to say it, he wouldn't be able to get an answer even if he racked his brains. She could only get up and return to her room with a gloomy face. Watching San leave with a smile, Yili took out the files sent by the Tianyi Pavilion from her luggage and continued reading. After getting the benefits, Han Mingxi was very reliable. Along the way to the south, she would receive a large amount of information about the southern Xinjiang from the Tianyi Pavilion almost every few days. Yi Li was already used to reading all the things she received, memorizing them in her mind, and then destroying the evidence. The one in her hand now should be the last one before entering the southern Xinjiang. Along the way, the general situation of the southern Xinjiang also gradually formed an impression in her mind, but how much of it was real would have to be verified after entering the southern Xinjiang. After skimming through the thick file in her hand, Yi Li calmly burned the file that was filled with handwriting to the ground. Early in the morning, Yi Li got up early as usual and went downstairs. There were already 2 tables in the lobby downstairs, one of which was San sitting against the wall. Seeing Yi Li come down, San hurriedly got up. "Gongzi." Yi Li nodded and smiled. "So early?" San was silent. Usually, with the others together, there was no need to be so early, but right now he was the only one following. Although he knew that the Gongzi wasn't without the ability to protect himself, he still couldn't help but worry. How could Yi Li not understand his thoughts, smiling helplessly? "Don't be so nervous, if you keep on like this, I'm afraid you'll collapse before we even enter the southern Xinjiang. Does it give you a lot of pressure to follow me?" San shook his head. "No, this subordinate thanks the Gongzi for your trust. It was just that he and the others grew up together. He was only a little older than Nc, but his temperament wasn't as steady as Nc's. So he was used to listening to an E and an heir's opinions. Now that he was the only one, it was inevitable that he wasn't used to it." Yi Li nodded with a smile, sitting down and calling the waiter to order breakfast. "2 Gongzi, are you also planning to go to the southern Xinjiang?" Yi Li was calling San to eat breakfast and a man at the opposite table stood up and asked. Hearing this, Yi Li put down the chopsticks in his hand and looked up to size up the person. His figure was tall and sturdy, and his appearance was average. Although he tried his best to show kindness to the 2, it was hard to hide the evil aura between his brows. San reached out and grabbed the sword on the table. Yi Li raised his hand to press down on the sword, inadvertently patting it. San frowned and looked at the person before taking back his hand and lowering his head to continue eating. The 2 people's actions were naturally seen clearly by the person who came. He didn't mind and smiled. "This brother doesn't need to be nervous. We are also going to the southern Xinjiang, so we wanted to ask if Gongzi wanted to go together." The man pointed to the 3 people at the opposite table and smiled. Yi Li glanced over there. An old man in his 50s or 60s who looked like a wealthy merchant. His body was covered in gorgeous and expensive clothing, as well as the jade thumb ring on his finger. He also held a gold abacus in his hand. He just didn't write, "I'm very rich, come rob me." Next to him was a middle-aged man who looked like a housekeeper and a sickly young scholar. This kind of combination could definitely be called eye-catching. At first, Yi Li was a bit worried that she and San would attract too much attention. Only after seeing these people did she realize that she was too much of a disgrace. Speaking of which, those who had the guts to go to the hinterland of the southern Xinjiang weren't trash. Yi Li looked at San and smiled. "I'm just afraid that we will cause trouble for you." The man smiled. "How could that be? I see that this brother's skills aren't bad. I've also been to the southern Xinjiang a few times. It's very evil. If we have a few more people, we can take care of each other, right?" The man looked at San and then turned his gaze back to Yi Li. It was clear that Yi Li was the one who could make the decision, but he couldn't see the depth of the youth in front of him. He could only secretly guess whether or not some family's young master who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth came out to play with his guards. "We plan to go to the capital of Nanzhao. There shouldn't be any danger along the way. I wonder who you are." Yi Li narrowed her eyes and smiled. Her smile was innocent and kind. The man laughed loudly. "We are also going to the capital of Nanzhao." Ai's road to the capital of Nanzhao was quite peaceful. However, since last year, it's been a bit mysterious. Our master is going to Nanzhao to do some medicine business. If Gongzi doesn't mind, why don't we go together? The rich merchant sitting across from them glanced at Yili arrogantly. However, the young man with a sickly face smiled and nodded at the two. Yili lowered her eyebrows and smiled. She tactfully declined, I only heard that Nanzhao's scenery is unique. That's why I plan to travel and broaden my horizons. Therefore, I found a guide in advance. It's just that he'll be 2 days late. Seeing Yili refuse, the man didn't force it. He only smiled and said, since it's like this, then I'll have to bother Gongzi. We might as well meet again in the capital of Nanzhao. Yili nodded slightly and watched the man return to the seat across from them. Across from them, the rich merchant scolded the man for being meddlesome and spoke disdainfully to Yili. Yili didn't care and smiled faintly and lowered her head to eat breakfast. Chapter 169. Once the table of guests left, San raised his head and said, Young master, be careful of those people. Yili raised her eyebrows and asked, You know them? San nodded and then shook his head, saying, I know that sickly scholar. Yili looked at San, somewhat curious as to how he could know this sickly scholar who had almost never left the capital. It seems like that sickly scholar's identity isn't simple. San nodded and said, his nickname is Sickly Scholar, no one knows what his real name is. Including Tianyi Pavilion. Yili lowered her head and thought about the sickly scholar she saw just now. He didn't look like a top expert and didn't have anything special about him. How did San see through his identity? San said, he is Shilin Country's Yanwang Chamber's 3rd Pavilion Master. A few years ago, almost all of the assassin organizations received the mission to assassinate the prince, including Yan Prince. Quite a few of our shadow guard died in his hands. However, he was also hit by Prince's palm and damaged his heart meridian. His original fake illness became a real illness. Did young master notice his right hand just now? Sickly scholar is good at poison. The color of his left hand's fingernails is different from normal people's. Others only think that his body is sick. In fact, he was already like this long before he was injured by Prince. That hand is caused by his years of practicing poison. It's incomparably strange poison. Yili lowered her head and recalled. Sure enough, she remembered that the scholar's left hand that was hidden in his sleeve was slightly exposed when he stood up. It really did seem to be dark red. Refining his own hand into poison. Isn't he afraid of poisoning himself to death? Yili didn't understand and felt that this method was meaningless. A body that was impervious to poison doesn't exist in a sense. It can only be said that some bodies have resistance to most poisons for some reason. If a person with poison all over could live peacefully, then Xinyang wouldn't have to spend so much effort to treat Mo Xiuyao. After breakfast, Yili went out and strolled around Yonglin City. She also learned about the situation of Nanjiang and Shattered Snow Mountain Pass. When she returned in the evening, she saw that the group of 4 were still sitting in the same place eating dinner. Obviously, they didn't leave today. Sickly scholar nodded at Yili and Yili in a friendly manner. Yili nodded back with a smile and prepared to head upstairs. Oh. When did such a fair and tender young master come to Yonglin City? Before Yili even stepped on the stairs, a vulgar voice came from the corner behind her. Yili slightly turned her body and saw a skinny young man dressed in Nanjiang clothes staring at her. His gaze was unbridled and full of lust. Even his small eyes that were like a mouse were full of turbid evil energy. She couldn't help but frown. In her previous life, including the underworld drug lords and terrorists she faced, she had never seen a person that tested a person's bottom line. San suddenly turned his head and stared at the young man with a cold expression. With a warning gaze and killing intent, as long as this bastard dared to say another word, he would turn him into a ghost under his sword. How could this kind of scoundrel profane the princess of Ding royal estate? That young man obviously took Ansan's warning as a provocation and became more complacent. Ansan's vulgar gaze lingered on Yili's body. At the same time, he didn't forget to arrogantly smile at Ansan. What are you looking at? Did this prince say something wrong? This boy has a powdery face. You Central Plains men all look like women. This boy is more like a woman than a woman. To be honest, Yili's disguise was very successful. Even if she looked prettier than most women, no one would suspect that she was a woman because of her age and bearing. Therefore, Ansan naturally wouldn't waste his breath to say anything to that vulgar man. He directly pulled out his sword. The long sword was unsheathed and it flew straight towards that vulgar man. The other party obviously didn't expect Ansan to attack without saying a word. That vulgar man was stunned for a moment as he saw that a hole was about to be pierced. The person beside him quickly pulled him away and with a wave of his hand, a slender thing pounced towards Ansan. Ansan snorted and the long sword in his hand drew out a sword flower. With two swish sounds, that thing broke into 3 pieces and fell to the ground. Everyone looked over and it turned out to be a poisonous snake. Although they didn't know what species it was, they knew that it was definitely a poisonous snake just by looking at the colorful pattern. Ansan raised his eyebrows in disdain. Since they were going to Nanjiang, how could they not understand the tricks that the people of Nanjiang were used to? Those Nanjiang people's faces changed. Only that vulgar man still hooted, "You have big guts. Do you know who this prince is?" Ansan curled his lips and sneered, "You dare to be so arrogant in Dechu state. Don't tell me you're a prince of Nanzhao." This prince remembers that the king of Nanzhao only has 2 daughters. That man wanted to say something but he could only swallow his words when he saw the long sword in Ansan's hand. With a face full of anger, he took a few steps back until he was in the middle of the people accompanying him before he hooted, "Kill this boy for me." The people beside him were clearly in a difficult position as they muttered something to that man. Yili stood at the top of the stairs and listened with her eyes lowered. It sounded like the language of a minority in Yungue region in her previous life. And because Yili had been active in Yungue region for many years, she was familiar with the language of the minority in this region. Those followers were clearly trying to persuade their master that they were standing in Dechu state and it wasn't appropriate to kill people in broad daylight. But that vulgar man clearly refused to listen to their advice and insisted on killing Ansan and capturing Yili. After a round of failed communication, the Nanjiang people looked at each other helplessly before surrounding Ansan and Yili. When the people in the hall saw that a fight was about to break out, they all scattered like birds and beasts. Even sickly scholar's table was left with only him and the middle-aged man. That old shopkeeper was so scared that he hid behind the counter and didn't dare to come out. Yili frowned and said, "Throw them out. Don't break other people's things." Ansan happily replied, "Yes, young master." "Who is so daring to make our young master Jun Wei angry?" Ansan was just about to make a move when a lazy voice with a trace of grease sounded from upstairs. Yili raised her head and saw a handsome man in loose dark red robes leaning against the railing upstairs. His every movement was full of flirtatious charm. Evildoer. Glancing at the dumbfounded vulgar man beside her who was drooling, Yili looked with a headache at young Master Feng Yu who was smiling at her. "Brother Han, why are you here?" Han Mingxi nimbly flipped himself over the railing and lightly landed on the stairs. He smiled and said, After thinking about it, I still don't feel at ease letting Brother Jun Wei go to such a dangerous place like Nanjiang alone. It just so happens that Jun Wei also needs a guide, right?" Yili couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. "Brother Han, do you know the way to Nanzhao? You're looking down on me." Han Mingxi looked at Yili plaintively and said, "I've been to Nanzhao at least 7 or 8 times. I won't go the wrong way even with my eyes closed. Besides, I can protect Jun Wei if I follow. Look, I'm only bringing one person out. We haven't even stepped out of the Dechu state and we've already met a lecher." Yili gritted her teeth. "Brother Han, I'm a man. Han Mingxi raised his eyebrows in surprise. He covered his mouth with his fan and laughed. Junwei is young and doesn't know any better. Who said that men won't meet lectures? That idiot over there, don't you think so? Chapter 170. That silly and wretched youth over there was already drooling as he nodded his head. Yili felt a wave of disgust as she turned her head to glare at Han Mingxi. She thought that this fellow only liked picking flowers, but it turned out that he liked both men and women. Junwei, don't misunderstand. Even if this elder brother likes both men and women, I still wouldn't fancy this kind of trash. No matter what. It should be a handsome young master like Junwei. Han Mingxi winked at Yi Li, wanting to reach out and pinch Yi Li's little face. How could Yi Li let him have his way? She closed the fan in her hand and slapped his wrist. Han Mingxi's face immediately fell. Han Mingxi slowly walked down the stairs, his phoenix eyes lazily glancing at those southern border people. Do you want to leave by yourselves or do you want this young master to invite you? That wretched youth came forward and said with a smile, does this young master also want to go to the southern border? This young master is the young master of Luoi tribe, how about this young master lead the way for you? He imitated the way the people of the Central Plains spoke. However, when paired with his cloudy, squinted eyes, his skinny body, and his self-confident smile, it really made one's hair stand on end. Yi Li's lips twitched as she lamented Han Mingxi's luck with women. She then pulled San to her side. Since someone wanted to stand up for her, why should they make a move themselves? Han Mingxi's peach blossom eyes twitched as he spat out a word with an expressionless face, scram. He was dissolute, but it wasn't to the point where he didn't care about men and women. Even if he liked both men and women, he was still picky, okay? This wretched youth who claimed to be the young master of Luoi tribe felt that he had been hurt. His original amazement and tenderness for the fairer sex instantly turned into anger. Kill these two brats for me and bring them back. Yi Li was stunned. Just now, they wanted to kill San and bring her back. Now that this evildoer Han Mingxi had appeared, they wanted to kill her and bring Han Mingxi back as well. What kind of situation was this? Han Mingxi's lips curled into a cold smile. Get out of here right now. Or do you want General Murong to personally escort you out? As soon as he said this, a hint of hesitation finally appeared in the wretched young man's eyes. Under the persuasion of the people around him, he snorted and ran out after leaving behind some harsh words. The hall was completely silent. Seeing that there was no fight, the old shopkeeper carefully stood up from the counter and apologized to the only remaining table of customers. Yi Li walked up the stairs and whispered to San to give the shopkeeper more money as compensation when paying the bill. Han Mingxi chuckled when he heard Yi Li's words. Junwei is really soft-hearted. That old shopkeeper has been running an inn in Yonglin for decades. What hasn't he encountered? Do you really think he's scared? Yi Li glanced at him and said indifferently, it's a fact that he drove away his guests because of us. It had nothing to do with whether he was frightened or not. Brother Han, this is my room. Han Mingxi smiled, Junwei, aren't you going to invite me in for a cup of tea? If you want to drink tea, why didn't you drink it in the hall? Han Mingxi curled his lips in disgust, drinking tea in that kind of place doesn't suit this young master's taste. I don't want to be poisoned in the middle of drinking. Junwei's luck is pretty good. You just went out and met the sickly scholar that everyone in Jianghu is afraid of. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and opened the door to let him in. She asked, you know about sickly scholar? What is he doing in Nanjiang? Han Mingxi shrugged and leaned back in his chair with his hands behind his head. He smiled at Yi Li and said, who knows? He was almost killed by Prince Ding a few years ago. It was the Yanwang Chamber's great pavilion master who personally came out to save his life. He hasn't come out for several years, and now he suddenly appeared in Nanjiang. Every time that guy appears, there will be rivers of blood. Junwei, don't be fooled by him. It's better to stay away from him. Yi Li nodded carelessly. Her mind had already turned elsewhere. I don't know him, so I won't provoke him. But Brother Han, don't you need to guard the Wind and Moon Pavilion? How come you have time to come to Nanjiang? Han Mingxi sneered, the Wind and Moon Pavilion doesn't need me to guard it. It's more reassuring for me to guard Junwei. After all, Junwei's Aromatic Elegance Pavilion is the only property that belongs to me. If something happens to Junwei, this young master will lose a lot. While speaking seriously, his seductive phoenix eyes revealed a playful look. Yi Li looked at him calmly. I have something to do in Nanjiang, so it's not convenient to take Brother Han with me. It's okay. You don't have to take me. I'll just follow Junwei. If Junwei wants to climb a mountain of swords, I won't go down a sea of fire. How about it? Han Mingxi smiled brightly. I'm very useful. Don't you want to use the information of the Tianyi Pavilion? As long as I'm by your side, I can get any information of the Tianyi Pavilion at any time. It's much more convenient than waiting for the information to come to your door. Yi Li looked at him silently for a long time, then said, I'm afraid that young Master Mingyue will find out that I took his brother into danger and accidentally kill me. At the mention of his brother, Han Mingxi's good mood suddenly became gloomy. He snorted coldly and said, Don't talk to this young master about him. He doesn't even remember that he has a younger brother now. Sooner or later, he will die. Humph. At that time, this young master will go and collect his corpse. Yi Li's heart skipped a beat. Although she had schemed against Han Mingyue and escaped from him last time, Yi Li seemed to have an innate vigilance against him. As for Han Mingxi, who looked very similar to him, she didn't have this feeling at all. Perhaps it was because of Han Mingyue's ability to establish the Breeze and Moon Inn and the Tianyi Pavilion by himself. Perhaps it was because of the inexplicable grudge between him and Mo Xiuyao. Perhaps it was because he was the first person who could truly threaten her. Yi Li calmly looked at the angry Han Mingxi and said indifferently, Since you're worried, just go and take a look. Brother Han, why do you have to follow me everywhere? Not only is it dangerous, but if something happens to young Master Mingyue, Brother Han will regret it. Han Mingxi was startled, but he soon laughed. What can happen to him? There are only a few people in this world who can touch him. Moreover, he doesn't need my help. In his eyes, I'll only cause trouble. Yi Li rested her chin on her hand and looked at him with a smile. I thought Brother Han and young Master Mingyue were brothers. Han Mingxi snorted and said, In any case, this young master wants to follow you to Nanjiang. Even if you don't want me to, this young master will follow you. As for my big brother, you don't have to worry about him. He won't be back anytime soon, and the Breeze and Moon Inn won't collapse. Yi Li shrugged indifferently. If she said too much, it would only arouse his suspicions. Since they were going to be together for such a long time, she had to have a way to find out where Han Mingyue went. She hadn't forgotten that Han Mingyue had almost ruined her reputation for a woman related to Mo Xiuyao. Who said she couldn't hold a grudge after apologizing? It was just that she didn't have to rush for revenge. As for using Han Mingxi, Yi Li glanced at the man who was smiling coquettishly. Who told him to be Han Mingyue's younger brother? Why did he have to bump into her? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.